Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I don't know. How am I doing? It's Tuesday. Hooray. Hooray for Tuesday, 9:01 a.m. Eastern Time on June 13th, 2023. It's actually arraignment day for Donald Trump, and I didn't really even think about that until the show actually began, and I began looking around and looking to see what was going on, and I see it's actually trending on the Bird site, and I don't really know what the status is, and what time he's supposed to report to the courtroom, or how things are going down there in the Miami courthouse, and I don't know which one they're going to, and holy mackerel. Let me catch up on some of that stuff, because, that's kind of important, although I am very happy that I really didn't, we live in a world where I didn't actually have to think about the arraignment at all, I guess, until I woke up and it was time to do the show. So he's arrived in Miami. That's what the news coverage is. I guess maybe they, sometimes they do these things like super early, but I guess maybe they're waiting could be until about now. I don't know. Let's look at this one here. Set to be arraigned on federal indictment. It's the Voice of America, which I like to think is me, but it's not. It's actually the name of, the radio station. Anyway, the Voice of America, in non-radio fashion, is reporting this in writing. Oh, look at this. All right. Well, here's the byline is way up here in the corner. Masood Farivar gets the byline on this one from, just after midnight, I guess. Today, former President Donald Trump arrived at his golf club outside Miami. I guess that's the Doral one. On Monday, ahead of his arraignment on charges stemming from his alleged mishandling of classified national security. You know why he's being charged. Okay. Here we are. The arraignment is set for 3 p.m. on Tuesday, which I don't know whether that's better or worse timing for trying to gather a MAGA flash mob, but presumably, you can go and yell at all the people who were there and say, get a job, you lazy bums, what are you doing? How come you're out here in the middle of the day instead of working productively somewhere? You can do that. They could ask you the same, but don't answer. So there you go. Okay, that's my advice to you. And now we know that, we'll get through the entire show without Trump actually being arraigned, and we won't have to cut away to the Florida courthouse for live coverage. But it might be we're unable to do anything like that anyway. But, now that's the explanation for why we're not doing it. And, okay, so no word in reporting that's been published so far about whether or not crowds are gathering. It's a little early, I guess, for them to be, know whether or not the 3 p.m. crowds, what they'll look like. I guess there's certainly people who will waste all day standing there. I want to get a good spot so that I can yell while a guy goes by to be arraigned. They can't really prevent anything. I mean, I guess post January 6th, I suppose you shouldn't say anything like that. They could certainly try. But I don't know. I'll keep an eye out. Let me go see what the trending reports are. Although now I can't see them anymore. Where'd it go? Okay. Is he no longer top tweeting now? Well, look at this. The new top trend now is earthquake. So, I don't know. Should we go check out what's happening here? Japan, I guess. Okay. So there you go. That's nice. And, what's that? It's nice. Not that there's an earthquake in Japan, but rather that, and I guess there's, I don't know, it looks like maybe there's a lot of places where earthquake is coming up, and I'm not certain, maybe it didn't happen in Japan. Maybe it was somewhere else, but there was a video of an earthquake happening in Japan and a nice person working next to someone else. There's, I guess, video from an office or something like that, or a school. It looks like a school. And there's a kid on crutches who's got a cast on his leg, and he can't get out of there quickly, and another student, I think, picks him up and gives him a piggyback ride out of the building. So that part is nice. Whether or not that means that the earthquake happened there, I have no idea. Okay. So usually you'll get an answer right away. It'll become pretty obvious where the earthquake was, but I guess not. Or maybe it's actually mostly people sharing this video of this. So who knows what's going on? Never mind. Never trust Twitter for news. Everyone can stop. You can all quit Twitter. I know Greg says it's the best source of news and information, but now it isn't, because this has made me confused and mad. All right. Actually, something I did see on the Bird site this morning. I don't know why I checked in particular, but I did, and I saw a weird and disturbing news story from Canada. So in Canadian fashion, I will apologize to the Canadians on behalf of America for infecting them with MAGA-style conservative weirdness. And I put conservatives, or I should have put conservatives in my tweet in quotes, and I thought about doing that because, of course, there's nothing actually conservative with what they're doing, these particular conservatives. But then I thought, well, they didn't say they were conservative, and I'm putting it in quotes, make it look like they said they were conservative. So anyway, I went without it. But at any rate, here's the weird story reported by Wilbur Turner, look at this. I don't know, 2S LGBTQ advocate. I admit to being baffled at the outset as to what 2S is, but I understand the rest of it. LGBTQ advocate, a writer, founder of Advocacy Canada. So there you go. And he comments on this story from castanet.com. Castanet, or is it like castanet, the, percussive instrument, or is it cast a wide net? I don't have any idea. Castanet.com. Okay. Well, castanet.net, sorry. And the news is from, where is it someplace to pronounce correctly? Kelowna? Kelowna. Oh dear. All right. I'm going to the map on that one. The Canadians are laughing. Although some of the, Ricky, for all I know, is saying, what, where? I don't know where that is. Kelowna, yeah, all right. That looks like all right. Well, it's British Columbia is the answer. And I was going to say that looks, maybe Kelowna sort of evokes the Pacific Northwest Indian tribal type names, or I guess First Nations tribal type name. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But that's my guess. Anyway, we have some idea of where we're talking about now. So here's the deal. Girl, this is the wrong headline, by the way. Girl, 9, accused of being trans at Kelowna track meet. Madison Reeve reporting for, it's ended up on Castanet. But at any rate, I don't know if that's her outlet or not. 2 Kelowna moms are speaking out after their 9-year-old daughter was verbally assaulted at a track and field event on Thursday at Kelowna's Apple Bowl. The mothers, who chose not to identify their daughter, say she was competing in a shot put event when a grandfather of one of the participants started yelling at her. She went to step up to compete for the grade 4 shot put final. And right before she went to throw, a grandfather of a student said, "Hey, this is supposed to be a girls' event. Why are you letting boys compete? My daughter is cisgender, born female. She uses she and her pronouns. She has a pixie haircut," said Mom Heidi Starr. Starr says the man then carried on to demand certification to prove that her daughter was born female. He stopped the entire event. He also pointed at another girl who had short hair, and he then piped in and said, "Well, if she's not a boy, then she's obviously trans." Starr said the man's wife then started calling her a genital mutilator, a groomer, and a pedophile. The school district superintendent, the school district is Central Okanagan. Oh, all right. Now we're getting into place names that I just don't have any hope of knowing how they pronounce it, because not only is it West Coast, it's Canadian. So there's no way for me to know. Anyway, the district superintendent stepped in. Long story short here, the guy got allegedly banned for life from sporting events from the school district, which is the proper way of dealing with it. And, well, that's proper. Anyway, they may also want to consider arresting him. This is, the whole thing is awful. Carrie Starr, the girl's other mother, says Thursday's events have rocked their daughter's confidence. This has destroyed our beautiful daughter's confidence, and she was inconsolably crying during this whole event and continued once it was over and we were leaving. Not to mention she was unable to concentrate on her track and field finals and the shot put throw for which she had qualified. The parents posted a photo and the identity of the man on a local Facebook group, but Facebook group, that wouldn't be good at all. But Castanet is not publishing that information because the man's identity has not been confirmed by the school district. However, I will point out, and reasonably so, I think that Wilbur Turner, I guess, found the photo in the Facebook group and posted it. And it's very interesting. The grandfather in this case is a very pumped up guy. He's gray haired and everything, but also extraordinarily tan. And I wonder just how much of that is natural, huh? I think he's a body mutilator and probably a groomer himself. And that's not entirely out of keeping with where I was going with this. As I was pointing out, one of the few things that I'm still willing, every once in a while, I just am moved to say, all right, the content is here on the Bird site. I feel like I want to comment on it. What's happening here is these, they no doubt consider themselves conservative, but these two grandparents are sexually harassing 9-year-old schoolgirls on their weekends. And as with everything, it's all projection. Every accusation is, in fact, a confession with these people, even Canadian conservatives. It happens with. They ended up, they had these weird beliefs in their head, but what ended up happening at the end of the day is they went to a grade school athletic event and just started sexually harassing 9-year-old girls. They thought they were right. They were wrong. They thought they were going to be yelling about transgenderism. They were not, because they were yelling about it, but there were no trans individuals involved. And even if, of course, if there had been, then they should have been arrested for harassing them. But yeah, if you just stand around and make comments about the gender and sexuality, and it's the gender and sexuality that, not even sexuality, just the gender, because we're talking about 9-year-olds. If on the basis of gender, you're just yelling and harassing these people, I don't know why that's not sexual harassment. These two are sex offenders, and their photos, I guess, according to their own philosophy, should be posted all over the internet, and they should be banned for life. But of course, as you know, we don't know. If you were to guess, you would probably say, as I do, well, he lifts a lot of weights and has a spectacular tan, so everybody has to listen to his opinion now because he totally didn't take a bunch of steroids or whatever. And he's the guy you have to listen to because he'll beat you up, maybe, if you don't listen to him, because look at his muscles, and so therefore, there you go. Anyway, they should be banned. Their grandchildren, presumably, were also competing in the event, or hopefully they were shielded from the whole thing. But their parents should be mortified, and they should probably start. Well, now they have no choice. They now say, Grandma and Grandpa, you can't come to any more school events because you're actually banned because of your big, stupid mouths. Just thought I'd point that out. But it's basically the MAGA transphobic equivalent of the good guy with the gun theory, right? Now, only a good guy with a big mouth can stop all the bad pedophile, trans mutilator, groomer, whatever. They came out and they started shouting groomer, pedophile, whatever. And at the end of the day, there's only 2 sex offenders here involved in what should be charges of sexual harassment against a 9-year-old girl. And it's you. And isn't that weird? What a strange outcome that is. Maybe you should sit down and shut up for a little while. Of course, maybe I should too. But I am already seated. So we have that going for us. Okay, well, I just thought that was rather remarkable, to say the least. And now I've said about the most I probably can say about it. All right, we're live. We're on. John Shiflett knows it. Anything that we should know for today about what happened today. I was calling yesterday National Falafel Day. John Shiflett was reminding you more to the point of our show ordinarily, let's say, that yesterday was World Day Against Child Labor with a U. So this is really English labor. Okay. Not World Day, but English and Canadian Day Against Child Labor. Approximately 160 million children worldwide are involved in child labor, which he spells without the U the second time around because he's American, which represents 1 in 10 children. So just wanted to point that out because that's a real thing, and I missed my chance to say it about it, and he offers us more information about World Day Against Child Labor with a convenient link if you follow along with John Shiflett's account on Mastodon. And by the way, if you don't, but you wanted to, you'll find him at John, Jon, Shiflett, Shifflett, and then there's an underscore and a capital V. I don't know if it matters whether the V is capital, but there he is. John Shiflett the Fifth, obviously. I mean, maybe he is. I don't know. But there you have it, and you can follow along. And then I don't have to tell you necessarily. Or when I tell you that there's a special link for you to follow, you'll be able to find it easily. Also, I guess speaking of Canada, but not anymore, our good friend who's still Canuck pundit on social media, now on Mastodon, Brian Monroe, who's still Canadian, I guess, but now, he tells me, has relocated to, he just skipped right over the entire United States and went down to the other end of NAFTA land, Mexico. Well, I thought that was really interesting. I probably got an answer, and I may have missed the answer. And I don't know what motivated it, but I don't know, seems brave to me. So kudos to you, Brian. That's a big move. I assume you're a Spanish speaker? Maybe, maybe not. I'm curious about what's going on there. Anyway, he chimed in to let us know that he was A, on Mastodon, B, in Mexico, and C, that as we said yesterday, as we were reminding everybody prior to today's arraignment, that while they say a good prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich, this time around, they indicted the whole pig. So that's a good one. And yeah, that's happening today. What else? Anything else that, John, what do you have for us today? He has sent us another story here for Tuesday. David Mills, associate editorial page editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. In today's birdcage lining, which isn't even on paper anymore. Is that right? The Post-Gazette? All right. I haven't worked through the details of his latest indictment because who has time for that? And what would it tell us that we don't know already? That's interesting. Top comment on such a piece by Vote Blue, supposedly, maybe yes, maybe no, is the Trump indictment is 49 pages with lots of spacing. It's easy to read and understand and read. Maybe you should do 15 minutes of research before writing about a subject. Yeah, I imagine that was probably in response to, I saw somebody making the very clever comment that the basic Republican response to today's arraignment and the indictment in general is that I haven't read it, but I know it's wrong. Yeah, and I think that's the general approach that people are taking. I don't know how you could have, I mean, I guess you don't, why do the work if you're just going to say the whole thing's wrong anyway, no matter what it says, and it shouldn't, why spend the time on it? But it is pretty easy reading, I must say. Okay, let's see. I just want to scan quickly and make sure I'm not missing anything else here. And I don't know. I probably am. But let's jump back into our usual routine for the day. It is Tuesday. We're hoping to hear from Joan McCarter in our last segment today. Curious about what's on her mind. I mean, I'm sure the arraignment is at least somewhat on her mind. Congress, of course, but we've kicked the debt ceiling issue down the road a little bit, at least, so that's no longer tops. But there was the Freedom Caucus temper tantrum last week that sent them out of session, but they're back now, so they're going to try and do some things. Maybe we'll figure out what they are. Maybe the SCOTUS rulings. Maybe the political news from overseas, which we could probably catch up on. But before we do, and before we jump away from the way we spent yesterday, which was very enjoyable, talking about the former guy and his legal troubles. We got to throw this one in. We have mentioned, only in passing, the fact that the case appears, the arraignment today and the rest of the case in the Pervolago espionage case has been assigned to Aileen Cannon, and we don't know why or how. That seems ridiculous, but I guess it can happen at random, even though I was a little puzzled. And I think, if I recall correctly, I saw on the Bird site, Armando too, first just sort of puzzled. Like, I thought she was in her own, division in, West Palm Beach, and wasn't in the general assignment pool for the entire Southern District of Florida. But I guess not. I guess she actually is. And so some question, as we mentioned yesterday, about whether or not she will feel chastened by her rebuke and reversal by the 11th Circuit, or for that matter, I don't think we mentioned this possibility yesterday, maybe the 11th Circuit feels like, well, we've done one, we took one for the team, and we reversed Cannon on this, ultimately inconsequential question in the grand scheme of things about the special master. But now it looks like we've gone out of our way once to be fair to the forces of truth, justice, and the American way. So why not now take the pass and go pro-Trump, the opposite of truth, justice, and the American way? I guess that's a possibility too. It just as maybe she'll be chastened and feel like she has to take corrective action. The 11th Circuit might likewise say, well, we can take either corrective action. It wouldn't be corrective of anything, but we can steer the opposite direction now because we're on record as being quote unquote fair. Now we can be wildly unfair and people will complain about it, but then we hand it to the Supreme Court and see what happens there. So then there was also the question of, well, can the government either convince her to recuse herself from the case or remove her from the case? Ask that, say, the chief judge for the Southern District of Florida reassign the case, remove her from the case, what have you. Those are possibilities depending on where you're coming from in your consideration of the case. It's considered more or less likely. I think generally speaking, it's an unlikely thing. It doesn't happen a great deal. This is an extraordinary case. They might, we mentioned yesterday, they might want to wait and say, well, let's see if she does anything wrong before we actually step in. Like, let's trust that we chastened her properly and that she's taken the instruction properly. On the other hand, there's also the view of this is an extraordinarily important case with a headline-producing defendant here. Maybe we should, from the very start, do everything we can to eliminate any source of bias or perceived bias or any perception that somebody might have that there's something other than above board and on the level dealing with the case, and that might involve removing Cannon from the case. Maybe not. If I had to guess, my general inclination is that they might say, oh, let's see how she does with the case, but be on alert. Now, the next question might be, how much damage can Cannon actually do in this situation? Well, we have one opinion, so that's it. I just wanted to let you know that we had one opinion. There are many out there. There's one that I've seen ones that say there's really nothing that she can do from this point on because although really it was mostly based on because she's been so strongly rebuked. But I don't know if I put a lot of stock in that. However, from someone who actually knows a little bit about what they're talking about, Mark Joseph Stern writes in Slate that Judge Aileen Cannon can absolutely sink the federal prosecution of Trump. This was actually included in Greg's abbreviated pundit roundup yesterday. Didn't get a chance to read it. Let's see what he's got to say. The federal criminal case against Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents will be overseen, at least initially, by Judge Aileen Cannon, according to the New York Times. This is excellent news for Trump and exceedingly bad news for special counsel Jack Smith. Cannon's total lack of principle, combined with her evident incapacity to experience shame, that would be bad if all were true, and maybe it is, renders her a uniquely favorable jurist for the former president. Indeed, if she maintains her grasp on this case, it's nearly impossible to envision Smith securing a conviction in her courtroom. Well, that's quite a conclusion. Cannon, a Trump appointee, gained notoriety while presiding over Trump's attempt to halt the classified documents investigation last year. Following the search of Mar-a-Lago, Trump's lawyers filed a complaint alleging that the search was illegitimate and unconstitutional. They demanded the appointment of a special master and, in the meantime, a freeze on the prosecutor's review of seized materials. In a calculated act of judge shopping, the case was assigned to Cannon, who leaped at the opportunity to prove her fidelity to the man who'd appointed her and perhaps audition for a future Supreme Court seat. Trump's lawsuit amounted to pure gibberish, a glorified Truth Social post that alleged a Democratic conspiracy, so Cannon promptly encouraged his lawyers to rewrite the suit so it sounded marginally less asinine. She then issued an order prohibiting the government from further review and use of any materials seized from Mar-a-Lago for criminal investigative purposes. The command marked the first time in the history of the Republic that a federal judge had claimed the power to stop a pre-indictment criminal investigation into a suspect. Cannon's overreach provoked genuine shock in legal circles and fear in the intelligence community as it effectively blocked officials from assessing the seized documents for national security risks. Her order reflected a profound misunderstanding of national security damage assessments. A right-leaning panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, which included 2 Trump appointees, soon stayed this portion of the decision, you remember that, highlighting its chilling effect on fundamental national security duties. When we return, find out more ways she can screw up.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or 2 would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. So let's see. We were in the middle of Mark David Stern's article about what could happen if Judge Aileen Cannon continues to preside over the Trump case. We're just guessing at this point. We don't really know where she's headed mentally in all of this. But the fact that it's a coin toss, will she apply the law, in reasonable fashion, or will she be a pro-Trump wacko fabulist, is troublesome. That's bad for the judiciary, bad for America. But anyway, she gets a chance anyhow. So where were we? Yes, right. She has just been, in our retelling of things here, rebuked by the 11th Circuit, saying that this decision had a chilling effect on national security duties. But Cannon wasn't finished. She agreed to Trump's request for a special master and appointed Raymond Dearie, you remember him, a well-respected federal judge. And you may also remember that there was really no legal justification for appointing a special master at all, but she wanted to help Trump, apparently, delay the case. And even that didn't work very well. So, after Dearie tried to bring some discipline to the case, though, Cannon immediately ran interference for Trump. She overruled an order that would have required the former president to either disavow or stand by previous claims that FBI agents planted evidence at Mar-a-Lago. She spared him the burden of lodging specific objections to the review of individual documents, which would have revealed the bogus nature of his claims to executive privilege, and she extended deadlines to help Trump drag out the special master's review for as long as possible. The madness finally ended when the panel of the 11th Circuit, made up again of 2 Trump appointees and the ultra-conservative William Pryor, so 3 conservatives, ruled that Cannon had no authority to hear Trump's lawsuit in the first place, rendering every one of her orders null and void. It was one of the most humiliating appellate smackdowns in recent history, a total demolition of literally every action that Cannon had taken from the outset of the case. The 11th Circuit accused Cannon of attempting a radical reordering of our case law that violated bedrock separation of powers limitations. That's quotes. And it directed her to relinquish control over the case. Now, fast forward to today. Cannon has been assigned to handle at least the initial phases of Trump's federal indictment in Florida. Her name appeared on the summons sent to the former president, as did Bruce Reinhart's, the magistrate who signed off on the Mar-a-Lago search warrant. Magistrate judges may conduct preliminary proceedings in a criminal case like authorizing a warrant, but it's unlikely that Reinhart will play a major role here. Typically, federal district court judges are assigned cases randomly, though the court may transfer a case to a specific judge who has prior experience with the matter. So perhaps Cannon's calamitous oversight of the Mar-a-Lago search dispute gave her dibs on this indictment. I mean, it would be perverse to say, well, you have previous experience with it. Yeah, doing it wrong, treating it horribly, but that is experience. That, I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, at that point, I hope it's random assignment more than anything else. Cases are also assigned based on workload to ensure that there's a roughly even distribution among active judges. All of this means that we don't really know why Cannon was initially assigned the case, and we don't know if she will keep it. We can be fairly confident, though, based on her history, that she will do everything in her power to keep it and protect her benefactor, who is clearly in immense legal danger from the case. Smith, for his part, has the option of requesting a different judge. 11th Circuit precedent allows reassignment when the presiding judge appears unable to put, quote, previous views and findings aside. This is a nice way of saying that they're in the tank for the defendant, although they could be in the tank for anybody in this case. Well, I mean, not in this case. In this case, they're definitely in the tank for the defendant. But I mean, in most cases, who knows who they're in the tank for? You don't want anybody in any tanks at that point, not in the judiciary. Trump would surely fight such a request, and it's impossible to say where the 11th Circuit would come down. Imagine, though, that Cannon does preside over this case. She has infinite tools at her disposal to thwart the prosecution at nearly every turn. Big swings like tossing out the whole case, a very real possibility in her courtroom of chaos, can be appealed and overturned, but at every step there are opportunities for sabotage. Cannon can try to rig voir dire to help the defense stack the jury with Trump supporters. She can exclude evidence and testimony that's especially damning to Trump. She can disqualify witnesses who are favorable to the prosecution. She can sustain the defense's frivolous objections and overrule the prosecution's meritorious ones. She can direct a verdict of acquittal to render the jury superfluous. She can declare a mistrial prematurely for any number of reasons, including lengthy juror deliberations, and stretch out various deadlines to run out the clock. Many of these procedural moves could not be appealed until the proceedings have drawn to a close. Appeals courts do not referee every little dispute in a jury trial as they happen. Cannon will be in control. That should be a frightening prospect for Smith. Cannon has already revealed her profound bias in favor of the president who appointed her, breaking a series of bedrock rules to help him escape the classified documents probe. Not very well, though, because that's why he's back in court. Now she seems to have gotten a second bite at the apple, a chance to manipulate court procedures to assist Trump and subvert Smith at every turn. Let's not pretend as if it's a mystery whether she will. Her name is already synonymous with MAGA-style judicial corruption. The simplest way to put it is if Cannon remains assigned to the case, Trump will not be convicted, no matter how damning the evidence. That conclusion is not defeatist or cynical. It is a mere acknowledgement of the reality that Republicans have created by stacking the bench with venal mediocrities like Aileen Cannon. Well, put it that way. And I guess you got me there. I don't know whether the 11th Circuit will be persuaded to agree that she's just, irretrievably biased. I think they might be forced to say, we need to give her a chance to demonstrate whether she's been properly rebuked here. I don't think it's wise. I mean, I think she's so, out of her mind that, there's little reason to jeopardize the case in any way by giving her a chance to do something wrong. And, like we said, if it's hard for you to believe, the evidence is overwhelming. Think again about how Stern describes the many ways that she can derail things. And, I mean, it is as simple as that, right? Well, they have this overwhelming evidence. There's the tape of the conversation at Bedminster. Now, even a normal judge could say, well, remember here that we hear what sounds like maybe paper rustling when Trump on the tape is saying, look at this document I have. That rustling is a hint that he might have paper in his hand. But, evidentially speaking, I guess the defense could object in a way or question whether or not, okay, well, is that sound in fact the sound of rustling paper? Let's start there. We don't know. We have an audio expert who says, well, rustling paper is one possible explanation, but, magma displacement is another one. All right. Hunt for Red October fans who are 300 years old. Could be anything. There's some doubt about that. Okay. And the judge could say, without really being wrong here, the judge could say, all right, well, it's a matter of fact finding for the jury to decide whether or not, as between the two experts, one who says that's paper rustling, and after all, it makes sense given what he's saying, and the other that says, sure, he's talking about having a paper in his hand, but that's magma displacement, not a paper. So since it's not a paper, it can't be the Iran document, so we don't really know whether the Iran document was present. And even if I lose on this point, I would then say, well, he has a paper in his hand, but we don't know if there's anything on the paper. We don't know if it's the right document. It could be a fake. It could be something else. Any number of things could have been producing that noise, including magma, but you people don't believe the magma thing. And he'll come into court with a hat, a big red hat with white letters that say magma. Anyhow, there's lots of room to say, fight that. And then, if there's any room for doubt about whether or not that was really the Iran paper, then how damning is the recording? And all of that could be fought by a normal lawyer in front of a normal judge. But with Aileen Cannon, you could go straight, if you wanted to, you could give this a try and say, that recording, why not just say that's a fake? That came from chatbot GPT. That conversation never took place. We object. We want that excluded at trial. That can't be shown to the jury. And if Aileen Cannon says, that's dumb, I don't understand, ChatGPT, what the hell are you talking about? Do you have any proof? Oh, wait a minute. I don't care. I'm the judge. You just say, yeah, that's persuasive to me. I'm excluding the transcript and the tape at trial. And Jack Smith's team, that's ridiculous. You have no basis for that. Yeah, well, I'm doing it anyway. You can appeal it later. You can appeal to the 11th Circuit and say that I was wrong on this ruling about the evidence, but in the meantime, you have to continue this trial without that piece of evidence. And Smith's team may say, well, that's fine. We have the transcripts of all these other things, like the confession, essentially, from one of Trump's own lawyers saying Trump asked me to take the classified documents that I found in my review home with me to my hotel room and pluck out the ones that were really damaging, and couldn't we just tell the FBI we don't have anything? Well, I'm excluding that too. Well, on what basis? On I don't care, and I'm excluding it, and you'll have to appeal it later. She could just sit there and rule all of the evidence inadmissible, and then have the trial, and then, whether or not she excludes all the evidence, she could let all the evidence in, and then still, it would be crazy, but at the end, she could say, as the defense rests, and the jury decision becomes the next stage of the case, she can give directions she can do two things. One, she can direct the jury in such a way that they can't possibly, based on the evidence you've heard, since I excluded it all, as a matter of law, you're probably not going to come to the conclusion that Donald Trump is guilty based on the evidence you were presented. Or I won't even give you a chance because I know that as a matter of law, based on the evidence presented here in court, because I excluded all of the stuff, based on the evidence that did make it in, there's no way you could conclude that Donald Trump is guilty because there's no evidence that he's guilty because I excluded it all. So I'm instead entering a directed verdict, which says, as a pure matter of law, since there's no way a jury, in fairly considering the evidence that they've heard, could come to the conclusion that the defendant is guilty, I'm going to preempt them and say, that's it, and I'm going to dismiss the case. And you would appeal, that could be all appealed, but not until it's all done. At which point, of course, then they, if the 11th Circuit still has its head screwed on right, they would then say, that's right, it's obviously correct that this has all been done wrong. We're overturning it and sending it back for a new trial, and we're going to reassign it because Judge Cannon is obviously crazy, and we're going to start taking disciplinary action against her, whatever. If they do all that stuff. Although, again, they could say, no. This is all wrong, and we need Cannon to get back in line here. We rebuke her findings, and send the case back to her and say, but this time do it right. And she says, okay, sure. And then maybe she does do it right. Or maybe she just does it wrong in a different way. And this could go on forever. I mean, there's good reason to believe that if they have to reverse her in the same fashion, they'll send it to somebody else. But, you never know. There's a way to make this thing go on forever. And if people are so inclined, they could do it. But, again, you're talking about, as we often talk about on this show, the gray areas of the law where, crazy things happen because immovable objects are met with irresistible forces, and you got to decide which absolute comes first. The judge's power inside the courtroom, the ability to say, if all I want to do is waste time, I can waste as much time as I want by saying bizarre things in court that don't make any sense, but forcing a judge to rule on them. If you also have an equally bizarre judge, forcing a appeals court to rule on how bizarre the judge is on top of it all. So yeah, it could go on for some time. Just putting that out there. So let's see. Other things to discuss. There are many. Sticking with this theme, just why not do 2 days on the former guy on his indictment day? It's worth doing more. I thought this was an interesting piece put together in Substack land by Caroline Orr Bueno, whose name we've called many times before. This is her Substack known as weaponedspaces.substack.com. And I guess this is the thing that will be put to test today. Declaration of war. That's enclosed in scare quotes here. Right-wing calls for violence are coming from the mainstream. So today we see what kind of protest element shows up outside of the courtroom. And we begin to wonder exactly how far will protest or resistance, if there is any, to this indictment and this case being brought, how far will it go? Post-indictment calls for violence, she says in her subheader, aren't just coming from the fringe. They're also coming from mainstream right-wing figures, and they're on the rise. So that is a little concerning, right? And she's collected a bunch of them just so we know the names involved. Let's go through it. Following the news of Trump's indictment on Friday, Trump supporters took to social media to express their outrage and almost immediately to start calling for violence and war. But these calls didn't just come from the far-right extremists or figures or the fringes of social media. They also came from mainstream right-wing politicians and media figures, including sitting members of Congress, of course. And we have a pretty good guess as to who, but I think there's some new-ish names involved here. Trump himself joined in, of course, as well, sharing, or retruthing, as he says, a flurry of posts on Truth Social, including several posts targeting Special Counsel Jack Smith, and one post that declared, in all caps, of course, "This isn't a game, this is war." Since these posts first started appearing on Friday, the frequency and intensity has only increased. Even more worrying is the fact that mainstream Republican politicians and other influential right-wing figures are continuing to post disinformation and incendiary rhetoric about the indictment and those involved in investigating and charging Trump, rhetoric that is associated with support for violence. Furthermore, when public figures and elites spread such propaganda, it not only increases its reach, but also typically leads to anti-government attitudes and increased acceptance of violence as a solution to political problems. Taken together, the involvement of mainstream politicians in promoting incendiary disinformation associated with violence, issuing calls for people to take up arms, and directing Trump supporters to show up at the Miami courthouse where Trump will appear on Tuesday paints an alarming picture that could easily be the backdrop for a future violent attack. That's on top of the hundreds of posts from anonymous Trump supporters who've flooded social media with talk of guns, civil war, assassination, and more. Next Tuesday, that's today, is not going to be the next January 6th, but it doesn't have to be. We could still see serious damage inflicted on American democracy and potentially American citizens if even one person decides to show up with a gun. Now, the next section is entitled, with a quote here, "We have now reached a war phase." In addition to Trump, a number of other prominent right-wing political figures used social media over the past 2 days, and more now, to issue veiled threats and declarations of war in response to the 37-count indictment handed down on Friday. By the way, indictments are actually, the terminology is that they are handed up for some reason. Handed down feels more correct in the vernacular, but this is like flammable, inflammable, but they're apparently handed up. Why are they handed up? I don't know. I think they might be handed up from the jury box to the judge who's on an elevated bench. The judge then, I guess, probably hands them back down to be read. So I don't know. I guess you could dispute whether they're handed up or handed down, but I learned in law school that they were handed up. Anyway, on Twitter, former Arizona GOP gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake involved the NRA and warned that Republicans have a lot of guns and are prepared to use them to defend Trump, while also doubling down on election-related lies and falsely claiming that voting machines were rigged on Election Day. And she did have a particularly egregious way of expressing it, and I can't remember what it was offhand, but basically making, again, Second Amendment threats against everybody who's involved in charging Trump here. Taking it up a notch, GOP Representative Clay Higgins issued what appeared to be a battlefield command for Tuesday when Trump is scheduled to appear at the courthouse. President Trump said he has, quote, been summoned to appear at the federal courthouse in Miami on Tuesday at 3 p.m., Higgins tweeted. "This is a perimeter probe for the oppressors. Hold R. POTUS," lowercase r POTUS, okay. Is that a typo or does it mean something? Our POTUS has this. Buckle up. 1/50K. Know your bridges. Rock steady calm. That is all. So we presume he's engaging in military or pseudo-military lingo here. Journalist and academic Jeff Charlotte, whose work focuses on American militia movements, noted that Higgins is using military language to refer to orders to stand by and prepare to take action such as seizing bridges in the area. "Take it seriously," Charlotte tweeted, explaining that the term perimeter probe indicates that Higgins thinks Friday's indictment will precede a bigger attack, while his instructions to hold are the equivalent of Trump's infamous stand back and stand by comments. The phrase buckle up, according to Charlotte, means prepare for war. I mean, I figured that out. And 1/50K refers to military scale maps. But in what way, I'm not certain. Anyway, Darwin, maybe Darwin knows that too. Know your bridges, he wrote, is militia speak for prepare to seize bridges. I mean, it's not that inscrutable. As a reminder, Higgins is on the House GOP Homeland Security Committee, which is tasked with ensuring that the American people are protected from terrorist attacks. Whoops, oh well. Among the most explicit calls for violence came from GOP Representative Andy Biggs, who tweeted, "We have now reached a war phase. Eye for an eye." I objected to this one when he did it, not just because it was a call for violence, but because we've just done the eye for an eye. He's saying, of course, this is common among Republicans. Well, we're going to indict Biden then. An eye for an eye. And, I mean, I don't know where the eyes, I don't know how you do your eye accounting. I mean, if you were of the mind that these sorts of charges are only political and only an eye for an eye, or that an eye for an eye is the only operative modality there is, and that's what we will have to engage in as Republicans, you might, and because Democrats do the same, of course, as they usually assume, well then, was not maybe the eye Clinton? Pick a Clinton. It could be either Clinton. Like, you investigated Clinton, you tried to indict him, and that's how we, once again had to end up teaching the American people that, quote unquote, you can't indict a sitting president, right? But they tried mightily anyway, and there was civil suits, and they pushed the envelope, and they finally did impeach Clinton, though they couldn't convict him. And in a world where you think everybody does everything tit for tat, why isn't that the eye? And you took the Clintons' eye, and so we'll take Trump's. Well, in that case, an eye for an eye for an eye. 2 eyes for us and 1 eye for you, I guess is the way that's supposed to work. Or maybe it's Hillary Clinton. I mean, all that lock her up chanting, and we're going to put her in jail, and how dare you, and serve her, and yada, yada. And we're going to protect national security. That was the whole premise of his campaign, was I'll be better with national security issues. And then, of course, he wasn't, and he was considerably worse because he was engaged in espionage instead. So that's all bad, but, maybe the lock her up. Maybe us now saying, well, actually, you might end up getting locked up. Is that not already an eye for an eye? Andy Biggs figures, let's take another eye, because, again, we should get 2 eyes and you should get 1. Anyway, Representative Lauren Boebert fired off numerous tweets on Friday about what she called the sham indictment, which she blamed on the deep state and a federal government weaponized, there it is again, against Trump and Republicans. Also on Twitter, Caroline Leavitt, the spokesperson for Make America Great Again Incorporated, and Kingsley Cortez, a digital media strategist for right-wing Center for Renewing America, joined in the calls for, quote, war. War is the remedy our enemies have chosen, Cortez tweeted, and I say let us give them what they want. Actually, court was the remedy that the enemies have chosen, and you're welcome to have your day in court, and we have no problem with that. But you, of course, have defined it as war, and so therefore you're going to do that instead. The MAGA Incorporated War Room also released a statement on Biden's abuse of power, which declared that the U.S. justice system must be confronted and destroyed. Okay, sure. While right-wing media figure Wayne Allen Root published an article titled, Indictment of Trump is a Declaration of War. This is their defund the police. Similar rhetoric was featured in posts across numerous social media platforms, including Twitter, Truth Social, The Donald over at Reddit, The Great Awakening, yada yada. Replies to these posts often included comments about guns, taking up arms, civil war, and the Boogaloo, an anti-government militia that started as a far-right meme referring to a coming civil war, as well as killing or otherwise getting rid of government officials. Meanwhile, on Fox News, a lineup of frenzied Trump supporters issued dire warnings about American democracy dying at the feet of the indictment. Former Trump aide Stephen Miller claimed on Fox that, quote, history will record today as the day we ceased to be a democratic republic, while former Trump acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker referred to Friday's news as a really sad day for our country and the stuff of banana republics. Meanwhile, the guy who replaced him, actual Attorney General William Barr, still a jerk, as noted by, I think, Laura Clausen's article at the front page of Daily Kos, but at least he's actually treating this right. Yes, this is a serious indictment, and if even half, I think, as he said, of what's alleged in the indictment is true, he's toast. So there's that. Sean Hannity, it's a dark day in America. There is no equal justice. There is no equal protection of our laws. Our system of justice has now been weaponized beyond belief, and this country is in serious trouble. Sure. Next section, buy a gun or help organize your local militia today. One of the most alarming social media posts in response to the indictment news was found in the Donald, on Reddit, right? Where one user posted a picture of Attorney General Merrick Garland writing, "The Second Amendment was written to protect us from domestic terrorists like Merrick Garland. Get ready for war." In another similar post about Garland on the Donald, one user wrote, "America cannot allow this cowardly thug to destroy our democracy. This is what the Second Amendment was made for. Buy a gun or help organize your local militia today." Warlordism, essentially, is what they're talking about here, if not outright terrorism. While the threat remains somewhat vague, i.e. there are no specific instructions about the type of weapon, nor are there directions regarding the timing or location to carry out violence, it still clearly raises serious concerns about the safety of the Attorney General, especially given that Trump and his allies in Congress and the media have spent the past 2 days pushing incendiary propaganda targeting the Justice Department and the Biden administration. All it takes is one person to perceive this as a call to violence endorsed by the president. In fact, this very thing has happened before, when members of a militia who were convicted of a hate crime against a Muslim argued that they should be granted leniency because they were doing what Trump would have wanted them to do when they carried out the hate crime. Yeah, sure. This was just after Robert Bowers committed the deadliest anti-Jewish hate crime in U.S. history after being inspired in part by a conspiracy theory spread by Trump. More recently, in August of 2022, an armed man who tried to attack an FBI field office in Cleveland was found to have an extensive posting history on Truth Social, much of which echoed Trump's own claims about election fraud and, quote, FBI corruption. No surprises there, of course, and, I think you get the picture. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. All right, let's see. I think maybe I'll save the international stuff for more digestion and maybe for discussion with Greg, who enjoys that topic quite a bit. But maybe what we can do, I'm going to stop with the Substack reading at this point. I mean, we've read some of the specific examples. You no doubt already had some idea about what people were saying on the right wing. But, it's risen to that level where they're essentially making those vague threats against the lives of the various prosecutorial officials all the way up to the Attorney General. And I'm sure there's some against Biden as well. But you get the picture, I think. All right, things that maybe we should give some time to before we turn to our last segment at the end of the show when we hear from Joan. I have some inkling what she might want to discuss, or at least some of the things that I think are interesting that she has definitely covered already. We'll see whether she wants to go that direction, but maybe we ought to spend a little bit of time laying the groundwork for examining what's gone on in the Supreme Court in the last couple of days. Probably by this point, you have gotten some inkling of what's going on, and particularly in the voting rights case. And that, too, I know is something that Joan has given some writing time to on the front page over at Daily Kos. But let's take a look at the article I put away about it from the New York Times, because, that's one of the places where lots of people read the newspaper. Adam Liptak, big name in court reporting there at New York Times, writes this piece from June 8th, I guess end of last week, when the cases were fresh. Supreme Court rejects voting map that diluted black voters' power. That used to be a given, that they would do such a thing. These days it's not. Ever since not that long ago, the Roberts Supreme Court decided that we're kind of post-racism now and we don't need the Voting Rights Act the way we used to. Subheader reads this way: voting rights advocates had feared that the decision about redistricting in Alabama would further undermine the Voting Rights Act, which instead appeared to emerge unscathed. So, seems like good news, right? The Supreme Court, in a surprise decision, ruled on Thursday last, we haven't gotten to Thursday yet so far this week, that Alabama had diluted the power of black voters in drawing a congressional voting map, reaffirming a landmark civil rights law that had been thought to be in peril. And should surprise no one, Alabama has been drawing congressional maps to dilute the power of black voters since there were black voters. So that should surprise no one. What the surprise was that back in whatever year it was, 2000, I don't know. What year did they finally do that? It was like 2010, 12, 15. I don't even remember anymore when they finally said, well, we're, like we said, post-racism now, and we don't need this anymore. And Alabama's probably not going to just go violating the voting rights of their black voters anymore, right? Well, as it turns out, within a couple of years, exactly the thing that all the critics of that decision said would happen have happened. But we just thought that John Roberts would ignore that too. But instead, as Adam reports here, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr., who is often voted to restrict voting rights and is generally skeptical of race-conscious decision-making by the government, wrote the majority opinion in the 5-4 ruling, stunning election law experts in agreeing that race may play a role in redistricting. The Chief Justice was joined by Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh and the court's 3 liberal members, Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. So no surprise from the liberal side. But yeah, I mean, I guess that was the basis of his original decision, was that, well, like we say about Republicans all the time, isn't calling out racism the real racism? Just like that weirdness prevails in Republican minds. There was this idea that, well, isn't race-conscious drawing of electoral boundaries the real racism? Isn't it actually reverse discrimination, essentially? If you draw your districts to be conscious of race, then you're not colorblind, which is the ideal here in America. And now if it turns out that being quote-unquote colorblind just happens to overlap entirely, the Venn diagram is a circle here, with advantaging white voters and disadvantaging black voters, well, that's crazy and all, and it sounds bad, but it was arrived at in colorblind fashion. This idea of we have to actually look out for and make sure that black voters don't actually have their votes diluted, that's just favoring them based on race. And we're against favoring people based on race, right? And, this is essentially the legal equivalent. That argument was the legal equivalent of, well, how come we can't have white pride things then, or white history month, or, well, because there's a difference between the historically oppressed and the historic oppressors, and you're just trying to level the playing field by bringing others who have been disadvantaged for centuries up to speed, and you're not going to be able to do that by pretending that, it's really all just about, pride and everybody should just be proud. There's plenty more to it than just pride. Anyway, you get the idea. Voting rights advocates had feared that the decision would further undermine the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a central legislative achievement in the civil rights movement, whose reach the court's conservative majority has eroded in recent years. Instead, the law appeared to emerge unscathed from its latest encounter with the court. The case concerned a voting map redrawn by Republican lawmakers after the 2020 census, leaving only one majority black congressional district in a state with 7 districts and a black voting age population that had grown to about 26%, right? So they're about a quarter of the voting age population, and they get 1/7 of the districts where they have a significant chance of being able to elect a black representative. And by the way, what is that? 1/7 is 14.2%. Not like the 26% that we're talking about in terms of population. But, they tried justifying it in various ways. But let's read through the article here. The impact of the decision, which required the legislature to draw a second district in which black voters would have the opportunity to elect representatives of their choice, will not be limited to Alabama. The other states in the South, notably Louisiana and Georgia, may also have to redraw their maps to bolster black voting power, which could, among other things, help Democrats in their efforts to retake the House. The Chief Justice wrote that there were legitimate concerns that the law, quote, may impermissibly elevate race in the allocation of political power within the states. He added, our opinion today does not diminish or disregard these concerns. It simply holds that a faithful application of our precedents and a fair reading of the record before us do not bear them out here. Justice Clarence Thomas, interestingly, of course, filed a slashing dissent. The majority's approach, he wrote, does not remedy or deter unconstitutional discrimination in districting in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, it requires it, hijacking the districting process to pursue a goal that has no legitimate claim under our constitutional system, the proportional allocation of political power on the basis of race. In all, he wrote, the majority ruled that race belongs in virtually every redistricting. Oh well, womp womp. Justice Thomas's bitter tone suggested deep disappointment with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh and profound regret over a missed opportunity. Justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett joined all or large parts of Justice Thomas's dissent. In a concurring opinion, Justice Kavanaugh wrote that it was possible that the authority to conduct race-based redistricting cannot extend indefinitely into the future. Justice Thomas responded that his colleague had nonetheless voted to sustain a system of institutionalized racial discrimination in districting under the aegis of a statute that applies nationwide and has no expiration date, and thus to prolong the lasting harm to our society caused by the use of racial classifications in the allocation of political power. The case was part of a pitched battle over redistricting playing out across the country. Civil rights leaders say that a redistricting process often disadvantages growing minority communities. Republican state officials say the Constitution allows only a limited role for the consideration of race in drawing voting districts. Attorney General Merrick Garland welcomed the ruling. Today's decision rejects efforts to further erode fundamental voting rights protections and preserves the principle that in the United States, all eligible voters must be able to exercise their constitutional right to vote free from discrimination based on their race, he said in a statement. Steve Marshall, Alabama's Attorney General, issued a brief statement. Although the majority's decision is disappointing, he said, this case is not over. Well, it is when you get to the Supreme Court. But okay, I see what you mean. You just sue again and say it doesn't mean anything for some reason, this previous lawsuit. After black voters and advocacy groups challenged Alabama's new map under the Federal Voting Rights Act, a unanimous 3-judge panel of federal district court in Birmingham ruled that the legislature should have fashioned a second district in which black voters either comprise a voting age majority or something quite close to it. The unsigned decision was joined by Judge Stanley Marcus, who ordinarily sits on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, and who was appointed by President Bill Clinton, and by Judges Anna M. Manasco and Terry F. Moorer, both appointed by President Trump. The panel found that voting in the state was racially polarized and that it would be possible to draw a second reasonably configured district to allow black voters to elect their favored candidates. The court relied on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which bars any voting procedure that, quote, results in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race. That happens, the provision goes on, when, based on the totality of circumstances, racial minorities have less opportunity than other members of the electorate to participate in the political process and elect representatives of their choice. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the lower court had gotten things right. We see no reason to disturb the district court's careful factual findings, he wrote. Justice Thomas wrote that under the lower court's approach, Section 2 is nothing more than a racial entitlement to roughly proportional control of elective offices, limited only by feasibility, wherever different racial groups consistently prefer different candidates. He added, if that is what Section 2 means, the court should hold that it is unconstitutional. Well, maybe they should not. Even as Justice Thomas portrayed the majority opinion as transformative, Chief Justice Roberts stressed that it merely maintained the status quo. The heart of these cases is not about the law as it exists, he wrote. It's about Alabama's attempt to remake our Section 2 jurisprudence anew. Last year, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the lower court's ruling by a 5-4 vote, ensuring that the 2022 election would take place using the legislature's map, the one with a single district in which black voters were the majority. Justice Kavanaugh voted with the majority at the time, saying the lower court had acted too close to the election. I take no position at this time on the ultimate merits of the party's underlying legal dispute, he wrote. And now it appears, at least for this case, well, maybe he did have something different to say. After all, Chief Justice Roberts dissented at the time, though he said that the court's precedents have engendered considerable disagreement and uncertainty regarding the nature and contours of a vote dilution claim. That statement suggested he was prepared to revisit those precedents. Instead, on Thursday, he let them stand. Earlier Supreme Court decisions have curtailed other parts of the Voting Rights Act. Here we are, is the answer I was looking for. In 2013, in Shelby County versus Holder, the court effectively gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which had required federal approval of changes to state and local voting laws in parts of the country with a history of racial discrimination. But that ruling assured the public that Section 2 of the law would remain in place to protect voting rights by allowing litigation after the fact. So it would have been a hell of a thing for them to then, in this case, now say, all right, well, Section 2 is gone also. In 2021, in Brnovich versus Democratic National Committee, the court cut back on Section 2 of the law. They actually took a swipe at it, limiting the availability or the ability of minority groups to challenge voting restrictions. Richard L. Hazen, a law professor at the University of California in L.A., said Thursday's decision, Allen versus Milligan, must be understood against the backdrop of the Supreme Court's recent decisions on abortion and guns, and a coming one that is likely to limit affirmative action in higher education. It would have been an earthquake for the court to have read Section 2 as the dissenters would have, severely curtailing minority voters' representation in Congress, state houses, and city halls, Professor Hazen said. Roberts and Kavanaugh's joining with the liberals in preserving the status quo helps not only minority voters, but the court's fragile legitimacy in the face of these other rulings and ethics scandals. So that's an interesting point, too. And I think it was actually the point that Joan was making in her own writing about the decision. I'll leave that for now, although I could read you what she wrote, and then that would really free up her hand to discuss whatever she wanted. But what if that was what she wanted to discuss? Because it was well done, of course, as usual. And we'll leave it there and just say, all right, when you've now read the background of it and whether or not we want to buy into the analysis of public pressure or pushback against what the court's been up to and the legitimacy crises that they have created for themselves played a part in influencing the justices' decisions here. All right, so now we have that on background, and we're caught up on those things. Here, I do have another story here that I know she covered that I'll just, if I discuss it, it blows the whole thing, so we'll just leave it for now. and allow her to bring it up as a topic independently. Okay, and let's see. How about let's see. I've got a couple of other items to bring up here. Let's read you this one here from the Washington Post. I'm not certain if this is a super long read or not. Actually, looks like a little longer than we actually have time for, but we'll put the issue on record nonetheless. Something we haven't had a chance to discuss here yet. Naomi Nix and Joseph Menn, writing at the Washington Post, their article entitled, "These Academics Studied Falsehoods Spread by Trump." Simple enough, right? Now, the GOP wants answers, and that definitely warrants dramatic music, of course. Representative Jim Jordan, you might have guessed on that one, is demanding emails and meetings with leading disinformation researchers, part of a flurry of records requests, subpoenas, and lawsuits that academics say have become a means of harassment. This is actually a June 6th publication date. It's been sitting here a while. Republican House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan and his allies in Congress are demanding documents from and meetings with leading academics who study disinformation, increasing pressure on a group they accuse of colluding with government officials to suppress conservative speech. Jordan's colleagues and staffers met last Tuesday, on Capitol Hill with a frequent target of right-wing activists, University of Washington professor Kate Starbird, 2 weeks after they interviewed Clemson University professors who also track online propaganda, according to people familiar with the events. Last week, Jordan threatened legal action against Stanford University, home to the Stanford Internet Observatory, for not complying fully with his records requests. The university turned over its scholars' communications with government officials and big social media platforms, but is holding back records of some disinformation complaints. Stanford told the Washington Post that it omitted internal records, some filed by students. The university is negotiating for limited interviews. The push caps years of pressure from conservative activists who have harangued such academics online and in person and filed open records requests to obtain the correspondence of those working at public universities. The researchers who have been targeted study the online spread of disinformation, including falsehoods that have been accelerated by former President and candidate Donald Trump and other Republican politicians. So you see what's happening here? Jordan has argued that content removals urged by some in government have suppressed legitimate theories on vaccine risks and the COVID-19 origins, as well as news stories wrongly suspected of being part of foreign disinformation campaigns. Last month, the founder of the conspiracy theory-prone outlet The Gateway Pundit and others sued Starbird and Stanford academics Alex Stamos and Renee DiResta, alleging that they are part of a, quote, government-private censorship consortium that tramples on free speech. Although those pushing the inquiries have yet to score a major legal win or pass legislation, the campaign has kept alive the narrative that government officials violate the First Amendment's free speech guarantee by working with a variety of professors, Twitter, and Facebook. They do not. And we, in the last couple of days, read an article that actually explains the legal reasoning there, although I can't remember exactly which one it was, but explaining that the fact that you partner with private entities and ask them to determine whether certain online activity violates their private terms of service or not doesn't turn it into a government action. The pressure has forced some researchers to change their approach or step back, even as disinformation is rising ahead of the 2024 election. As artificial intelligence makes deception easier and platforms relax their rules on political hoaxes, industry veterans say they fear that young scholars will avoid studying disinformation. The political part is intimidating. To have people with a lot of power in this world making false claims, false accusations about our work, said Starbird, who has sharply cut back on public engagement. We are putting that out of our minds and doubling down on the work, but we're stepping away a little bit from the spotlight because those tactics work. Starbird's meeting Tuesday follows a letter from Jordan in March to the University of Washington's Center for an Informed Public, which she co-founded to focus on online disinformation. The letter demanded years of her communications, saying the center may have supported a censorship regime backed by the federal government. Whether directly or indirectly, a government-approved or facilitated censorship regime is a grave threat to the First Amendment and American civil liberties, Jordan wrote, or would be if it existed, I suppose. After an earlier Jordan letter to Stanford, lawyers at the institution warned researchers to be more thoughtful about what they said in emails. It makes me more careful in my communication with colleagues and collaborators, said Professor Jeff Hancock, the faculty director of the Stanford Internet Observatory. Jordan spokesman Russell Dye argued that the multitude of requests will build on evidence that shows an organized effort to tamp down conservative speech online. The committee is working hard to get to the bottom of this censorship to protect First Amendment rights for all Americans, but not really. And he didn't say, but not really. Right, again, the problem is that there isn't evidence of any organized effort to tamp down on conservative speech online, but it does happen that a vast majority of the disinformation and violent speech online is right-wing, and it makes it look like a conspiracy because you do it so often and you get found out so often. Academic institutions and philanthropic organizations kickstarted the disinformation research field 6 years ago after revelations that Russian operatives were covertly using social media to influence the 2016 presidential election, and it became a booming sector of scholarship, dissecting the anatomy of viral conspiracies. Some findings drew wide attention, such as reports that Russians pushed anti-vaccine narratives abroad while promoting vaccines at home. But the study of online disinformation turned into a political lightning rod, with partisan groups sparring over who determines what is true and what the consequences should be, if any, for those who persistently spread lies. Many of the academics who are under the microscope have worked on the most fraught topics, such as false claims that fraud cost former President Donald Trump the 2020 presidential election, conspiracy theories about coronavirus vaccines, and foreign influence campaigns targeting Americans. Jordan's committee has sent record requests to a number of universities and independent research groups that worked on the Virality Project, which monitored anti-vaccine narratives across social media platforms after coronavirus vaccines became available, according to a person familiar with the matter who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. Groups that received demands for information include the Stanford Internet Observatory, the University of Washington, the National Conference on Citizenship, and New York University's Center for Social Media and Politics, as well as its Tandon School of Engineering, the person said. In one letter obtained by the Post, Jordan alleges strong ties between the Virality Project and federal government agencies, most notable being the Office of the Surgeon General and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The letter seeks years' worth of communications between employees at those organizations and representatives of the executive branch and social media companies. The entanglement of executive branch agencies, third-party organizations, and technology companies to moderate speech-related content online raises questions about the extent to which these actions affected the civil liberties of American citizens, Jordan wrote rather repetitively. He basically is saying the same thing over and over again. And in fact, they're doing the same investigation over and over again. This is the Twitter files writ large. They are sure that they are going to find, and that when they get a hold of these files, that they have found evidence of collusion between private entities or public university researchers and the federal government, such that there are First Amendment violations. But just as with the Twitter files, it will turn out that though there's discussion of what to do with these things and what to do with mounting volumes of misinformation, There's just nothing that rises to state action, the level of state action, and no cause of action for it. But as it's become apparent that that's not the case with the Twitter files, they've just shifted focus and say, let's run the same play against these universities and see if we can't disrupt their work while they scramble to prove that this is no more substantive an accusation than the Twitter files accusations ever were. And that costs time and money and causes researchers to shy away. And even if it doesn't cause them to shy away, it causes them to spend more of their time defending themselves than actually conducting the research. So you get to see what's going on here. There's a considerable amount left here, and I guess more description of Kate Starbird's troubles with being able to continue with her work while in the midst of having to reply to all these demands for information. Don't think we'll get to it unless it's something Joan wants to discuss, but we'll let her take control of the conversation after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I do recommend to you that you take a look through the Washington Post's recounting of all the harassment that the disinformation researchers are going through. I don't think you'll find that any of them are a terrible surprise. We've seen stuff like it going on for a long time. But yeah, it's of course part and parcel of their tactics. They don't want their disinformation to be disrupted. So what they do is just harass the people who have a chance of exposing them to you, the public, so that you can understand and combat that misinformation, or at least disarm it when you run into it. But if the people who are teaching you how to do that are too concerned with arranging for security at their offices so they don't get assassinated, well, then they just stop teaching people about it, and the propaganda, I guess, continues to work. So bad news for them. I do recommend the article. Joan McCarter is here. There's plenty to go over. I think we've given good background now on what happened at the Supreme Court with the voting rights case, but I know that was on your radar last week. And there's even George Santos news that we haven't spoken about here, but which you have, which you could clue us in on if you felt that was a direction to go. But
wait,
what's
which
important?
George Santos news? I had Matt Gaetz news.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. It was a Matt Gaetz news. Oh, there's also George Santos news somewhere.
What's the George Santos news?
That one I think now that I think about it, did we mention it last week? Right. That his lawyer turns out to be a January 6th, I don't think he's been arrested for it, but he has his lawyer in the cases being brought against him for fraud is a January 6th attendee, and that he's also got someone on staff that was an attendee. But yeah, the Matt Gaetz thing is actually what I was thinking about. So yeah, I understand something has happened here with the ethics case.
with the ethics case.
Now, the federal investigation against him and criminal investigation against him was dropped, dismissed some time ago, right?
Right.
And this is the same incidents, but different
with
forum.
A different twist, because some of the stuff that happened on the House floor surrounding this whole alleged drug dealing, sex trafficking of minors.
Regular legislative
regular
behavior.
Florida guy stuff.
Yeah.
Florida man.
Okay. Right. So what's happening?
The House Ethics Committee, when it was under Democrats' control,
yeah.
but it was bipartisan. The Republicans went along with it, said, okay, we are going to investigate all of this, including the allegations that he was hanging around on the House floor showing pictures that other members found objectionable from his cell phone.
Okay.
Nice guy.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to be doing with your time.
But the Department of Justice asked them to set aside their investigation while the criminal investigation went through.
Right.
Now that that's over, the House Ethics Committee is free to open it back up, and they have quietly done so, according to Punchbowl News.
Huh.
The timing of it is what was interesting to me, because, of course, Matt Gaetz is one of the ringleaders that shut the House down last week.
Yeah.
So
I think that was a swing at him to get him to...
Is it... I mean, he'll certainly cry retribution. He hasn't said anything yet that I've seen. I haven't seen a comment from him on it. So are they trying to rein him in? I don't think, if they are, it's working. McCarthy met with the group. They're not all Freedom Caucus, I should make clear. It's sort of easy to just say they're Freedom Caucus. I don't think Gaetz is even in the Freedom Caucus.
Oh, that may be.
Just,
who knows? He just
him.
But if he shows up, they'll let him in. Probably.
Right.
Come on in.
And McCarthy will let him in, call the shots, basically. Yeah. Which is what happened in the meeting last night, apparently. As much as we know is that the House is going to work this week, they're going to allow the rule votes this week.
Okay.
And the other thing that we know is that, the gavel is basically theirs to extort as they will. They'll go week by week deciding what they're going to let McCarthy do.
Okay.
Gaetz came out of the meeting saying that they're going to have a new power sharing agreement in writing.
Oh, in writing. We'll see.
Yes, in writing this time that'll be public.
Do any of them read? I'm not sure, because that makes it easy.
Not
right?
Bet on it. No.
Okay.
McCarthy says, "Well, no, I don't think that we have anything in writing." So clearly, we've got the setup for the next big fight and the next shutdown, which could be a real shutdown.
Oh, all right. Well, that feels traditional, so maybe that's
one
good.
concession that we definitely know McCarthy made was that they will get their way on spending levels in the appropriations bills.
Okay.
Last week's fight was over who knows what. Clyde and Boebert said it was over Clyde's gun bill. Some of them said it was over the debt ceiling agreement. Some of them said it was because McCarthy broke a bunch of promises he made about the Rules Committee and other things. They didn't really have, on Tuesday last week when they shut everything down, they didn't really have a coherent message. By the end of the week, they had decided, okay, yes, we do. It's about the deficit, and it's about not, spending our future into oblivion. It's about our insistence that we roll back government spending levels to FY 2022. And that's apparently what McCarthy got Appropriations Chair Kay Granger to decide to do. She put out a press release last night saying, well, yep, this is what we're doing. She didn't say we're caving into the maniacs, but
okay.
They caved to the maniacs, and they are going to put through bills, spending bills under those levels.
All right. I mean,
I think we
not
talked
all right.
about this
That's bad, but
before.
understood.
Whether the spending agreement in the debt ceiling negotiation in the agreement was going to be a floor or a cap.
Right. So they're going with cap.
They're going with cap. They're coming
All
in
right.
way under.
No, we figured that's what Republicans would try to do, and
On the House side.
yeah, they have that majority there. So that's
on the Senate side,
one.
even I mean, it's Susan Collins doing the negotiating for the Republicans. She's saying, no,
boy.
I'm working with the agreement we made. Those are my numbers.
Okay.
And I'm assuming Patty Murray is going to agree with her. So that sets us up for, of course, government shutdown.
Yeah. And didn't we mention like last week that if they don't pass all of their appropriations bills, that's automatic across the board trigger? Is that supposed to be regarded as punishment? Will the Freedom Caucus not want those to happen? It's supposed to be regarded
as deterrent.
Yeah.
That both the things that they supposedly want, an increase in defense spending and an increase in veterans health care spending,
then they wouldn't happen.
Those wouldn't happen, and in fact, they would be cut.
Yeah. So to
but
the extent
the Freedom Caucus is sort of saying, yeah, well, we don't care.
Well, okay.
We want those cuts too.
Oh. All right. I mean, again, I keep saying, all right. No, not all right. I mean, I don't agree to that. Okay, I hear you. You're crazy.
This is where we're at.
Right. All right. Well, this is. I began to, when we were talking about it last week, I began to worry about, the supposed deterrence that's built into this is not a deterrent to the Freedom Caucus. They don't care. And now we've given them the opportunity to say, well, we've just figured out how to disrupt things such that no bills can get passed. And all we have to do to get these cuts triggered is make sure that, I mean, depending on how the language is written, maybe as few as one appropriations bill. If we just screw that one up, then there's across-the-board cuts. I'm still curious about whether or not the cuts would apply to departments whose appropriations had been successfully completed or not. In the same way we, have partial government shutdowns. So I'm not sure.
We won't know for sure. If they do them piecemeal, one by one, and goes through the whole process and Biden signed them, then yeah, they would be funded. But almost certainly they're going to do an omnibus where they have them all combined.
Yeah,
almost certainly.
It's funny. That's their view of that. To them, that's strategically better. So they'll say, no, that's regular order. Now it's become regular order over the past 30 years, but it's not actual regular order. Normally, you're supposed to do these all one at a time. Mm-hmm. And when you do them one at a time and you get, 6 of the 12 done and you run out of time and the fiscal year ends, you'll have a partial government shutdown. But the departments that have gotten their appropriations bills done continue to function under the new budget. And I'm not certain whether, I don't know whether they're going to try and do them individually. It's unlikely because they have no experience with it. But
no,
they could. But then I wondered, how many bills would they have to screw up? But if they do it as an omnibus, they only have to screw up one bill to get those cuts too.
Right.
So,
and, it's always done.
Maybe it's safer to do it. Well,
not always, but it has been being done as an omnibus because that puts more pressure on everybody to get it passed because there's stuff in there that they like, supposedly. That's the one that they use as the big must pass that they can attach things to.
Right. That does help.
So they try to up the jeopardy of it not being passed by putting in all of the stuff everybody wants.
Right, but that might not stand.
So when you're dealing with a group of nihilists who don't give a damn,
then I guess it's certainly a less potent weapon.
So well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it and see how they approach it. Do they try and maybe they want to do the ones that are worrisome to them in terms of cuts, defense, etc., and do those appropriations bills separately, as they sometimes do. They'll take care of the easy ones and then do an omnibus for the remaining 8 or 10. That sometimes happens.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
The other thing that's going to happen is that they're going to be full of really bad policy writers.
Oh, well, that's probably always going to be true.
Yes.
No matter how.
But, it's going to be defunding Jack Smith. That was the latest from Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday.
Because defund the police, sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm sure they'll try and do that. We'll see how successful they are with that, or whether it makes a difference. But
speaking of which, happy arraignment day.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's happening. I realize we're going to have to wait all day for it to actually happen. But...
I know, 3:00. We'll be live blogging it at Daily Kos.
Okay.
Just in case it turns into a mini January 6th.
Right.
That's not the only reason we're doing it, but
he's a president that's being indicted. That's news.
Yeah.
A lot of people would think that was news. It's Donald Trump, so it's really not actually news. Oh, yeah, he's being indicted. Of course, he should be being indicted every day. But we're just getting around to it now. So I can't decide whether, was 9 a.m. a better idea in terms of like, hey, Florida men are still on meth at that point and they can't get up and protest? Or is 3 p.m., optimum for them? Is it somehow worse? Is it too hot at 3 p.m.? I don't know. I wonder.
I don't like that it's 3 p.m. I don't want to have to wait that long.
Yeah. Well, I'd rather it was done and we could see what the results were, not so much inside the court. Although with Aileen Cannon involved, I'm curious now to see what are the results. Does she just get there and say, there's no arraignment, I don't have anything?
and it'll be interesting to see if Aileen Cannon feels at all the weight of her responsibility to justice.
Yeah, I mean...
Or if she feels her weight of her responsibility to Trump, who gave her a lifetime appointment.
It's just that open a question, which is what makes it such a circus. And I mean, there's so many things that could happen. And I guess this will be an early indicator, but again, who knows? What if she has beneath it all somewhere some inkling of strategy and says, oh, I'm going to go buy the book in these initial phases so they don't take the case away from me. And then I'll wait for some critical moment in the trial and then go crazy. How will we know?
Is she a strategic thinker?
I don't know.
I mean, she might be, but also we saw the picture of her floating around last week of, her face paint and her crazy Trump rally.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
thing.
I did see that picture.
So,
I don't think it even struck me that was her.
It was her. Yeah, the cowboy hat and the face paint.
That's not great. Yeah.
No, that's not great at all. But it makes you kind of think maybe when it comes to Trump, she's not a particularly strategic thinker.
It could be the case. I really don't know. And also not sure whether it will matter. I mean, what if you did go crazy right from the beginning? Like, it's dumb to have to consider this stuff because you're like, well, no, that won't happen. How could it happen? I don't know, but there was no justification for the special master, but she just said, you know what, special master.
Yeah.
So could she, among the things that a judge could do is get in there and arraign everybody else and then not arraign Donald Trump. I mean, you would be in a big trouble and there would be all sorts of repercussions and you might, in a sane world, lose your judgeship. But, I mean, one of the things that you could do is when that paper hits your desk, just go, give me another one. and say, I don't know why you're even here. Hi, Mr. Trump. How are you? Now I'm going to arraign the next guy. Well, but there'd be, you'd have to, what do? You go and you get rid of mandamus, I guess, ordering her to read the damn paper, but that won't happen today. So you could go that route. Or you could just say, yeah, everybody knows the arraignment is coming. Or you've arranged for a rally at which you're going to gripe about an arraignment. So I don't want to not arraign you so that your speech is messed up. I'll arraign you today. And then, I'll schedule the trial. We'll have a scheduling meeting and the schedule will be, July 2035. That's when we're going to try you. Well, okay. Yeah. At any point, she could do something bizarre, at which point it becomes too late to correct it without taking 6 months to make it happen. So that's bad.
It's bad.
And
it's bad.
She could wear the hat in court, maybe. Who knows?
She
Paint her
could.
face.
She might.
Right.
And there's a new argument in Slate that I was just seeing go away. And I can't see it because of my ad blocker thing on Slate. That the 11th Circuit could potentially order the presiding judge of the district court to reassign the case.
Yes, this could happen. The chief judge in the district might be able to. I mean, again, maybe you could do anything.
That's not her
happened.
recusing, which I don't know that she would be likely to do.
Yeah, I'm sure she would try not to, but it's very difficult to know. And then my thinking on this stuff was a good parallel to something that you had just written about the Supreme Court cases, about public pressure and the reputations of the courts for integrity, not just the Supreme Court, but everywhere. So,
and that's what I was kind of thinking of, whether, is this the kind of person who is going to feel the weight of that judgment upon her?
Yeah.
Is something she's considering?
And it's hard to tell. And then it made me think, like yesterday I was speculating, well, maybe she's been rebuked really strongly by the 11th Circuit. So she may say, I really have to play this one straight. I have to correct course. But then that also made me think, what if the 11th Circuit, if you're considering everything, what if they were saying, you know what, we ought to start this game off by rebuking Cannon strongly, which will give us room to tack the other direction when he ends up appealing his case, whoever it's assigned to, Cannon or anybody else. And we say, look, we played one for the forces of truth, justice, and the American way last time. Now we're going MAGA on this one. We're at both sides. We're playing it even. I don't know. There's no way of telling, what the 11th... the 11th Circuit's panel's decision on her first go-around was a bit of a surprise because there was 2 Trump judges on it.
Yeah.
And they could easily have said, to hell with the law.
Well, you've got to consider, and we saw it in the Supreme Court, that even some Trump judges know that they are Trump judges.
Yes.
Are watching this, don't like the idea that they have that asterisk by their name forever.
Yeah.
That they are Trump judges.
Yes, that's got to be disturbing to them, and certainly bothering
I think that's
Roberts.
One of the things going on with Kavanaugh.
Yeah, that may be right. We were just going over all of these, the voting rights case, and trying to imagine, all right, what is it that drives Kavanaugh to back away from the conservative wing here, which they could have talked him into it and say, well, let's crush the Voting Rights Act once and for all. Let's erase Section 2 along with Section 5. Just give us your vote. And he says, I'll leave the door open for revisiting Section 2 later, but for now, let's say no to that. And I'm not sure what drives it, or maybe it was just one of those things he paid attention to in law school and said, all right, whereas other things he may have been, drunk in class or whatever. And
maybe Roberts has a lot of sway on him.
Yeah.
The shock to me was Roberts. Roberts actually offering the opinion.
Yeah, that's true, considering that he, had led the way, and
he has spent his entire legal career fighting voting rights.
Yeah, it's odd that would happen, and you're at the cusp of victory for your side, and I don't know, either the reputation of the court thing bothers you, or you're like, maybe he's having a moment like you and I, like having gone through college on like Soviet studies, and then say, wait a second, I'm about to make myself irrelevant. Let's save my area of expertise. So, I don't know.
I mean,
We could do nothing about that.
That could be, I suppose.
But I'm the only one in control of whether or not voting rights litigation is over. The era is over, and I no longer have any particular expertise. Or, I don't know what's doing it. But I think your theory is probably the best one going. That public pressure about the reputation of the Supreme Court is producing, and it only has to move one or two people occasionally.
Yep. And I don't want to overstate things because I'm pretty darn certain things are not going to go our way on affirmative action. That comes down.
Yes, that could certainly be the case. And
I'd love to be surprised there too,
true.
But I'm not anticipating that.
Yeah. Well, that would be a good surprise. And I was sort of thinking, like, if they were strategically trying to say, well, we're going to go one way on one and one way on the other, they'd probably say, you would guess, they'd say, well, let's go the other way on voting rights because that matters to us politically. And then we'll save affirmative action and then say, see, you can all go to college or something or whatever. And we did some of both, so leave us alone. It's a real surprise. They must have genuinely thought there was some real value to preserving voting rights, which I feel like I have to read it again. Like, well, what are you fudging? What are you lying about? You don't really care about this stuff, or at least I thought you didn't. So what's happening? And I know, I suspect,
and that could be that it's flying too close to the Trump realm.
Maybe.
That they just don't want to look that Trumpy. I mean, I think we are pretty safe now from the independent state legislature theory in the Supreme Court.
That would be wonderful. I mean, that would certainly seal them forever in the Trump realms. That's crazy. Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of inexplicable, but I'll take it. And my suspicion initially was, well, is this something that they landed on as an inevitable, logical conclusion in order to be able to preserve some principle that they plan to use to overrule something good later? But I can't find it just yet.
I know.
When it happens, we'll notice.
The other case that I wrote about was equally as surprising to me in that it really did reassert that, there are federal guarantees, federal rights in programs like food stamps, Medicaid. They really did uphold sort of federal supremacy in these programs and say, the federal law does say and does grant individual people in these programs these rights.
Okay,
It was a sleeper of a case, but it was a really big case. It could have made or break Medicaid.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean that way. And, you wonder every once in a while what are the limits of the federal Supreme Court, trying to devolve everything to the states. Eventually that they'll say, there has to be some federal power or else, once again, we're obsolete and we're writing ourselves out of the equation. But I guess the fear was
7-2.
Okay. Well, they all get federal paychecks, so they should all realize it at some point. But I wonder if it had anything, when you mentioned we may be safe from the independent state legislature theory, like, oh, well, okay, they have been going crazy devolving things for a while, and now it's reached the stage where any further devolution to the states erases the federal role in a lot of things, or at least makes a headache for us as 50 different states come to us with 50 different rules for how they're going to run federal programs and who are they going to look to solve these disputes? Us.
Right. Yeah.
So let's head them off now.
That could be part of it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
But part of it, also could be maybe the Senate's going to get serious about looking at reforming us, and maybe they are going to do something about us, and maybe we should give them less fodder to do so.
Yes.
Maybe.
Why not? I mean, that after all, we were all taught that was the lesson of the whole FDR court packing attempt was that, well, even though that he never actually got to expand the court, it's taught that, the court began reversing its direction on what it was doing in order to preserve itself. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to believe that it couldn't happen again. So maybe.
And it goes back to the shadow docket ruling they did not make. The gun ban in Illinois.
Okay.
They had a chance to say, no, Illinois, Second Amendment, you can't do this. You can't ban assault weapons. And they didn't.
Yeah.
Again, when the case actually comes before them, as it eventually will, I don't think we'll see the same outcome, but they decided not to do it in the shadow docket this time around.
Okay.
And, they've done an awful lot of very bad things through the shadow docket. So,
yeah.
I think we really, truly are seeing some restraint.
Wonderful.
That we certainly didn't see last year. We didn't see pre-Dobbs.
Yeah, and of course that has got to have a lot to do with it too, and they've realized exactly what the threat is of backlash if they really do continue to undermine their legitimacy and threaten everybody's rights. Then they really could elect the Congress that actually would reform the Supreme Court. So that may be on their minds as well, and still should. Because don't trust these guys to do the right thing every single time, because they're going to do it at the minimum amount of times possible that they can get away with, I'm sure.
Precisely that.
Okay. Well, good. All right, we've come to the end of our time today. We'll have to leave it there, although we covered it pretty well, I think so. It's a good place to leave it. And now we get to go and observe the events of the day. And I don't know if you guys need any more time. And popcorn is instant these days, so we can wait until 2:59 for that one.
On Daily Coast. Follow along with us.
Will do. And we'll see you, I guess, next week. And we're heading into the summer. You'll have to tell me what your summer vacation schedule, if any, is coming. And, you don't have to tell me. You could just bring it on as a surprise. And it might be a surprise to you, too. You might have no plans.
It could be. You never know.
I don't know. Okay. Great. Thanks for visiting, Joan. We'll talk to you again next week.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care. Time for us to hand things over to Justice next.
From NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, well, I'll bet he's totally not talking about Donald Trump at all. All right, well, it is the first item on his agenda, but he's got more. Let's see. Funding for schools, literacy programs, and special education teachers in Oregon could be jeopardized by a Republican walkout that has stalled hundreds of bills and derailed the legislature for nearly 6 weeks.